From the racing capital of the world, Indianapolis, Indiana, welcome to yet another episode of the greatest spectacle in podcasting, the Seventh Gear Overrev Show, presented to you by our great friends and partners over at KrausMeats.com, purveyors of finest quality, handcrafted, small batch artisan sausages and meats all over the North American continent, as well as our good friends and partners over at Dick Carriers and Respect Your Package, makers of those high-end premium breathable men's underwear. We appreciate their help. We'll talk more about both of those here a little later on in the show. But holy smokes, Seventh Gear Overrev fans, I can't tell you how excited I am for tonight's guest or today's guest. This is a gentleman that I've been fortunate and privileged to call a friend and a mentor here for a long, long time. We've known each other seemingly forever. I actually, full disclosure, actually used to work for tonight's guest back in the days when the Miles Ahead driving school at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and the Mini Coopers were going on. But I love this guy to death. He's a racer at his core. He is always hustling, making something happen, whether it's the Miles Ahead program that he had, this great replica liveried 1972 Eagle Indy car that he owns and gets to drive, and I'm so jealous of that, to what he's doing now. He was actually on a previous show back when the show was under the Seventh Gear Show livery, so to speak, since we're on that topic. But the one and only, my good friend of the show, Ted Woerner, welcome back, my friend. How are you tonight, buddy? Good to see you.
Yeah, hey Kevin, doing great. It's good to see you again, and it's been a while, but it's great to catch up. And a lot has happened since the last time we talked.
It sure has. I mean, it's just when I think you've evolved from one thing into the next, and you're all in on the vintage Indy stuff, and you're driving that great Swede Savage, replica Eagle at these cool racetracks around the world, and all of a sudden I hear, hey, Ted's up at the M1 Concourse up near Pontiac. And I'm like, wait, what? This guy literally never sits still. He's constantly going, and now he's running. I mean, we're going to get into some of the stuff that he's doing, but first thing I wanted to ask you, Ted, is because I actually heard about your role up at the M1 from our friend Mike Lashmit back, I think it was in May. So tell me, and for those of you Seventh Gear Overrev fans that don't know, M1 Concourse is it's kind of its own little sort of private circuit, not unlike the Audubon Country Club or the Concourse Club down in Miami, but it's up near Pontiac, kind of at the hub of everything automotive. You're right outside of Detroit and all the major manufacturers and the
Right.
Dream Ride and all that kind of stuff. So tell me, Ted, exactly, I don't even know what to call you as far as your title there and what you do. What is it? How did it come to be? Did it find you? Did you find it? Talk us through this whole thing, because I'm just like blown away. I'm like, God, just when I thought I knew what he was doing, he's doing something else.
Well, like most good things in life, it was kind of accidental, kind of a happy accident. I had first been to M1 Concourse as a participant in the American Speed Festival a few years ago, and I'd heard about it, but didn't really know how beautiful it was until I got there for the first time, and was really blown away. It's in Pontiac, Michigan, which is it's not exactly Pebble Beach, let's put it that way, but it's definitely an oasis in the middle of the town there, and so I had participated there, and then of course in my business Miles Ahead, we had made a transition to using electric powered racing carts for the events that we did, and as you probably recall, we spent 10 years with a relationship with Mini USA, doing driving events with Mini, and had a blast. And then that relationship wound down about the same time that COVID hit. So we got kind of a double whammy there. And so we were hoping to pick right up where we left off with another manufacturer. And then that fell through at the 11th hour. So we invested in our own small fleet of electric powered racing carts. And we thought, you know what, we know how to do these events. We know they're fun. And, the fundraising world is always looking for something new and fresh to do. And, wouldn't it be, and we had already done some fundraising events with our minis, and we knew there was a huge need in the fundraising world to, bring something new and fresh to the people that go to these, galas year after year, and, they're looking for something new. And so anyway, we bought these electric powered racing carts, and that was really the entree to me meeting my current boss and owner of M1 Concourse, Paul Zlotov, because he was in the process of designing and building his own version of an electric racing cart. And he has some very specific parameters that he wanted to design into that. So he was kind of going off, doing his thing at the same time that I was doing my thing. And then we had a conversation. I can't even remember how. Oh, Mike Lashman, my friend at Vintage Indy, said, Ted, you and Paul need to talk because you're both kind of doing the same thing with electric carts. And he's getting ready to invest a whole bunch of money up at M1 Concourse to build this, this kart racing track. And that's certainly the case. So anyway, I called him. It was more just kind of like comparing notes about electric karting, and I was kind of curious to know what he was up to. He told me on the phone. We talked for about an hour or so. And ironically, earlier that summer, I had put together a business plan, or I met a gentleman in Carmel, Indiana, my hometown, who had recently purchased a country club down near the Florida-Georgia state line. And we met him at the Carmel Fest of all places. We had a tent there with our go-karts, and he was like the last person that walked up and visited with us on the second day. And so we were kind of tired and dragging, and but he seemed like a real sincere, genuine guy. And one thing, he was fascinated by our carts and the electric carts and the fact that we did these racing events. He said, could you like build a track somewhere? Like he said, I just made this big investment down in Georgia, and I've got a lot of real estate holdings down there, and I would love to build a track there. So I said, well, sure, yeah, we can do that. So long story short, I put together a proposal for this gentleman that was almost identical to what Paul already had in mind for the X Center, as we call it, at M1 Concourse. So when Paul and I were talking, and he was describing me, his vision for the X Center, I said, Paul, you're not going to believe this, because about a year ago, I put together a proposal for a developer that was almost identical to what you're telling me about. I mean, everything, big slot car track, a balcony overlooking the track, which was illuminated at nighttime. Just about everything he told me about the X Center was something I had already been percolating in my mind with this developer down south, or the gentleman who owned the property anyway. And that project didn't go anywhere for various reasons, kind of back burner kind of thing. And so then when Paul and I were talking, my business is miles ahead. It was tough. I don't know that we ever really fully recovered from COVID. We were now in the mode where we had to sell the events and do the events, whereas for 10 years working with Mini, they basically sold the events or lined up the events with the dealers, and then we would just go do the events. And, there was plenty of work involved doing that. But, now when you add sales on top of it, wow, it was a lot of work. And the nonprofit organizations that we were targeting, they're thinking a year out. So it's not like, you can make a sale now and next month you get paid. I mean, it's a year out.
Right.
So it was, I was kind of ready. I was winding down. I didn't want to invest any more money into miles ahead. It kind of lost energy for that. So this conversation that I had with Paul was very fortuitous, very lucky. Timing was perfect. And, we quickly started talking about, would it make sense for you to come up here and run this new facility? Are you interested in that? And, in a relatively short period of time, we came to agreement, and here I am up in West Bloomfield, Michigan, living next door to the Ferrari store. And spent a couple weeks at a time up here, and we still have our home down in Carmel. But it's been a blast, and the people I work with are great people, and it's kind of a dream come true. It's really, really a blast.
Well, yeah, and you're I'm sure within a short arm's length of our friend CEO up there, Tim McGrain. He had come on the show with us before and had a really great conversation about that. But so when exactly did that come to fruition, Ted? That you took that jump and moved and started working up there?
Yeah,
Was
so
that
it
like
was
earlier this summer?
it was about a year ago now that I had this serious conversation with Paul, and he said, and I thought, I was just gonna, retire early and do some more book writing. Had some neat stories lined up, still do, that I'd like to jump into and, write another book or two. But then this opportunity popped up, and I started work on January 6th of this year. So Paul had said to me, he said, you can start work really whenever you want. We're not going to break ground on the X Center until the spring, but if you'd like to, he said, we could really use some help in our festivals and events group. So, if you wanted to start now, before we break ground on the X Center, that would give you an opportunity to learn the business. And I'm like, heck yeah, why do I want to sit around and, when I've got an opportunity like this, let's jump into it. So I've been spending most of this year learning the business, primarily from our festivals and events standpoint. And it really has only been in the last 3 weeks or so that I've transitioned over into my current title, which is director of the X Center. And the X Center now is, I'd say it's maybe 30% done, 30 to 35%. We've got the 5/8 of a mile cart track in place with a base layer of asphalt, and then the building, which is considered the X Center itself. The elevator shafts are going in. It's a big project, and we're not anticipate opening the center until next summer sometime.
Yep, those were actually two of my questions. I was going to ask you how far along it was and when you expected to open. And how much more realistically on the construction side of things can get done, knowing that we're, basically mid-November, and, certainly, Pontiac, Michigan is not the tropics anytime soon.
No.
So
Yeah, no, we've got a great construction crew. The gentleman heading up the project has worked with Paul on numerous projects in the past. They have a great working relationship, and he's a great guy, Mike Sally, and so it's really a pleasure to work with him. But so a little background on what we're building. So we've got the electric racing kart track, and there will be one long circuit and then two shorter circuits, and all three of those circuits can be run in either direction. So we really have a combination of 6 possible circuits to run. We also have about 25 garages that we're building around the circuit. So those will be rentable spaces. And so it's almost like a small version of our big track, our performance track, which is 1.5 miles. And we have 255 condo units around that track. So we're really building a smaller version, if you will, of what we already have there. And this will be open to the public year round, which is different from M1 Concourse. We're open to the public on certain days, certain events and festivals that we have throughout the year. But typically, we have a lot of corporate events in our event center throughout the year, all year round. We don't consider our facility to really be seasonal, despite the winter. And then the X Center, the building, we're going to have 8 racing simulators. We're going to have 4 golf simulators. We're going to have 2 giant slot mods, slot car tracks, which are going to be phenomenal. Those are almost done. And then we will have a restaurant upstairs with a deck overlooking the racetrack. And, and I'll have an office in there, and, we'll have room for support staff and whatnot. And that's about a 25,000 square foot building. And then we've got, like I said, the garage is going up around it. And so this is located on 9 acres in the southeast portion of our property. So Woodward Avenue and South Boulevard are the streets that kind of define where it's located. That would be in the northwest quadrant of that intersection. So it's quite a project, and I'm very, very flattered that Paul has put the confidence in me to do that. And he said, when we came to terms, he said, Ted, come to work for us for a year, and let's make sure that it's something that you want to continue with, and something that we want to continue with the relationship. And the relationship has been great. I've been involved in some festivals this year that the American Speed Festival, for example, which the focus was Indianapolis. So if there was ever anything in my wheelhouse, that was pretty much it. And then our Checker Flag Ball, a big annual fundraiser. Allenser Jr. was named our Master of Motorsports. So obviously with the Indianapolis theme, and my good friend Mike at Vintage Indy, and some of the other folks that I know of who have these exquisite vintage Indy cars. We had a couple dozen vintage Indy cars there, and a lot of that was my heavy lifting in partnership with Mike and some of our team as well. But that was personally very gratifying. And then we even had the Gordon Pipers and the Borg Warner Trophy at the festival, and those were both kind of ideas that germinated out of my mind. And then I've got a colleague of mine who also came from Indianapolis, and so she and I together kind of brainstormed how we could dovetail the Gordon Pipers and the Borg Warner Trophy into some of the ceremonies. And there was one part of our fundraising night where we had the Gordon Pipers lead the Borg Warner Trophy. The two security guys from Borg Warner, were walking in, escorting the trophy with their cotton gloves on, and the Gordon
Right.
Pipers were leading the trophy into the ballroom, which was it was very impressive.
I
Neat
can only
experience.
imagine. Yeah, that sounds amazing. A couple of things that you just mentioned that I kind of want to follow up on. So obviously you've got the karting track. Is it going to be? I'm assuming electric karts, and are they going to be some version of yours, or is it going to be kind of Paul's design and what he had in mind once the track is up and going?
Well, yeah, so like I said, he went down this extensive development path on a version of kind of his uh, thought on what he wanted. He wanted something that was maybe a little more car-like than cart-like. He didn't even want to refer to it as a cart because it really wasn't. It had front brakes, it had a full sports car body. I mean, it was a beautiful little vehicle, but it still needed some development, and that development was getting expensive. And then, we were going to have to produce, 30 of these things roughly. And the pricing was going to be, significantly higher than what commercial carts cost now. But, the situation he found himself in, and we found ourselves in, was that, you know, these integrated electric racing carts that have the performance that we want, the reliability that we want, didn't exist when he started down this development path of his own cart. So he came to the realization, and a lot of us provided him the data to support it, that, look, these carts exist now. They're commercially viable. They're commercially available. Other tracks are buying them and using them with success. So I got to hand it to Paul. He really surprised me, surprised our whole team, that he decided to make a change. And it reminded me of when Roger Penske's cars at the Speedway weren't up to speed, and in the middle of the month of May, he went and bought a couple marches. And that
Yeah.
was kind of the similar. And I told Paul that. I said, I'm really impressed that you made a very tough decision, having invested so much time, energy, and resources into the development. He said, Ted, I can make the tough decisions, and it's a business at the end of the day. So I've learned a lot from Paul, and he's an interesting guy. Been extremely successful in business, and I really enjoy working for him. He's very direct, but he's also very friendly, very motivated. Of course, I mean he's like a Roger Penske. He's in his early 70s, I think, and more energy than we all have. It's pretty amazing, and he's got a memory. Unlike like Roger Penske. He meets somebody and he remembers their name from 10 years prior. That kind of thing.
Right, right. Yeah, that's amazing. And it's really refreshing to hear a business leader that's willing to recognize that, maybe his vision moving forward was not great, and there was a better option out there, and was willing to not kind of fall on the sword to protect his own ego, but actually make the change that made the most sense from a business standpoint.
Yeah,
But
and he
um,
keeps telling us that the important thing to him is benchmarking. Don't give me ideas or opinions. Tell me the facts so that we can decide from facts, which is what we did. Myself and Ed Lawrence was also a colleague of mine, is a colleague of mine, who was very helpful in gathering the data that we needed to make what we thought was a better business choice, and Paul agreed with us. But he will listen to you. He may still do what he wants to do, but who are we to second guess a guy who's been as successful as he's been? And so I find it, even at my age, interesting and stimulating to observe him and the way he conducts business, and then pick up some neat things that I can apply to the way I work.
Well, and I think that's one of the keys, right? Especially as we gain that life experience, regardless of what industry we've spent our time in, to continue to learn and to continue to be open to learning from different viewpoints or different industries, whatever. I think is a key piece of kind of what keeps us moving forward. But to that point, though, Ted, I have to say, one of the things that strikes me the most about the M1 Concourse compared to the other racetrack country clubs, because as you know, and I think most of the seventh gear overhead fans know, I used to be the assistant track manager at the Audubon Country Club, which basically just celebrated what 20 years, something like that. Um,
Right.
and
Hmm.
then looking at places like the Concourse Country Club. I will say that the M1 really stands out to me in that they seem to have the most events, I guess to kind of put it broadly, the most events that I've seen any other club do, whether it's a fundraiser or a specific event or the American Speed Festival. That's the one thing that really stands out about the M1 to me is the amount of events, big, small, medium, compared to anywhere else. And I would imagine obviously you see it firsthand because you're there, but are there things that struck you about the number of events and how they go about, cultivating them and then putting them on? Because it seems like the M1 has a pretty large staff overall to be able to make that all happen.
Yeah, the staff seems small to me for the amount of work that we do, that's involved in these events and festivals. And of course, having my own event company for 13 years, it was no surprise to me the amount of details that you deal with on some of these events. I mean, it was staggering. And I ended up standing into the breach of a vacancy that occurred in, well, midsummer, mid to late summer. We had one of my colleagues, left, and he was in charge of finding cars, and making sure we had enough of the right cars at our festivals. And I fortunately I had been to two or three of the American Speed Festivals already, so I wasn't, completely out to lunch when this responsibility fell in my lap. But it's a tremendous amount of work, and you can feel it. It's got to be like similar to like conducting the Indianapolis 500, where you have this, one event, massive event a year, and then you have a few others throughout the year like we do. But you can sense the buildup of the stress and the tension. And that being said, the team there is just a blast. We're all professional. We're all well-educated, smart, motivated people. Paul hires good people, and so it's really a pleasure to work with this team at M1. And my big regret, if I have any regret now transitioning over to the X Centers, that I won't get the chance to continue to work with my teammates in the festivals and events team, because we have such a great time together. But I'll be forming my own team with Paul and Jim Gray, who's the chief operating officer. We've got identified the positions that we need to hire, and so we'll have our own team. And we even have a team in the event center that works. So we've got one office where I work now on the north end of the property. We've got the event center kind of in the center of the property, and then the X Center is going to be slightly south of that. So even though we have three different uh, office locations, if you will, on the same property, we're on the same team, and we all work together. It's really a fun group.
Well, that sounds absolutely amazing, Ted, and I'm so happy for you that this is all kind of playing out, and you're the perfect guy for that role, and the fact
Thanks.
that you get to work with like-minded people that continue to drive you and you drive them, and you have the respect of the ownership there. I think that's fantastic, and I'm also glad to hear that you're going to get a little bit of a break here over the holidays because you're going to need it, right after the
Oh yeah.
turn of the year with the way that build is going along, and I'm sure you're already forecasting and you're booking for that X Center, when it opens, early summer, midsummer, whenever that happens to be. But will that leave you any time to get to drive your baby? That beautiful
Oh,
Swede Savage liveried car.
oh yeah.
Are you gonna be able to get some time in that?
Well, I certainly hope so. I know one thing's for sure. Well, maybe not for sure. This year at the American Speed Festival, I've driven it. I drove it at every Vintage Indy event this year. But on Saturday, the first of the 2-day festival at the American Speed Festival, I wasn't able to drive it at all because I had so many responsibilities. It just was going to be a distraction, and I couldn't, I couldn't let my teammates down on the first day of the festival. There's too much to do, but yeah, no, that's this is like Roger Penske says, racing is his like round of golf, and it is for me as well. Even though we don't, not wheel to wheel racing, anytime you're driving this Eagle Offenhauser, it definitely gets your attention. And so yeah, no, this is something that's I look forward to every year. I'm very very blessed to be able to have the opportunity to run this car and to own it.
So just just so you know, and I'm just gonna take a little bit of a leap here, but knowing how busy you're gonna get, if there's if there's any thought that you might need a relief
I know
driver
what's coming.
or a reserve driver, I'm your guy. I'm your
Yeah.
guy. Um,
Okay.
but speaking of this car, Ted, I mean, this is one of the most iconic liveries in Indy 500 history. You know, from 72, 73. I mean, that whole deal. And for as long as you and I have known each other, and we talked a little bit about this off air, I never really asked you, when did you get the idea that, hey, I would really like to own, first of all, an Indy car, maybe a vintage Indy car. And then you were like, well, how did it go from that to an Eagle? And then how did that go from, okay, not just an Eagle, but let's take one and basically recreate it in the image of my childhood hero. And then, okay, how did the car get located? Then what was the process of converting it to the Swede Savage effectively duplicate? And then to the point of hearing it run for the first time, then getting in it and turning the wheel for the first time. And I know you've driven it multiple times, but I never really talked to you about this. It was just sort of like, oh, wow, you've got this car. This is so cool. And you get so overwhelmed by just, it hits you in the face. It's like, how did this whole thing go from A to Z? And I guess that's my question. How did it go from A to Z, Ted?
Well, I had been going to the Vintage Indy events with my friend, and I can't even remember how Mike Lashman and I met. But we hit it off pretty well right from the very beginning. And um, I, then it was my company, Miles Ahead. We started going to the Vintage Indy events and setting up kind of a hospitality area from some of the event assets that we already had. And so, it got me to the Vintage Indy events that I dearly loved. All those cars were just are just amazing machines, and most of which I remember from my childhood. And so anyway, I was kind of part of that scene. And then, one of the most impressive cars I remember is part of the membership group was owned by a gentleman named Philippe de L'Espinay, who worked for Dan Gurney at All American Racers from time to time back in the 60s and 70s. I don't know if he was ever a full-time employee, but he was certainly a consultant, and he was a very good artist. And he designed the iconic rainbow eagle paint scheme on Bobby Unser's 1972 Olsenite Eagle that to this day still has the record for the biggest 1 year increase in speed at the speedway, 17 miles an hour
And that
faster than
rainbow
the previous.
livery was also on Bobby's helmet, too.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, if you look over my shoulder up on the wall, you can see that's me driving the car. Um, yeah, there's I guess the camera's backwards. Anyway, that little picture up on the wall over my shoulder, that was a beautiful shot taken from the bridge over Gasoline Alley, looking down at the Olsenite Eagle. That was so the first time I actually drove the car was at Indianapolis of all places. So talk about a dream come true. But anyway, to fill in more of the blanks of your story. So Philippe he had owned the car. It's a fascinating story about the car. Um, there were 29 Model 72 Eagles built in 1972. It was the most successful race car All American Racers ever built, certainly by volume, if not outright performance on the track. So, but they had two chassis left over from the production run, chassis number 29, chassis number 30. They didn't produce a chassis number 13 out of superstitious reasons, which is kind of funny. So anyway, but these two chassis were completed at All American Racers, and all the parts to build two more cars existed there for years. And Philippe finally approached Dan Gurney and he said, "Hey, we've got these two chassis up there that, are, I don't know, this is probably 20 years after they were built." He said, if you let me build those into complete race cars and I give you one of them, would you let me keep the other one?" And Gurney said, "Yes." So the car I own is one of those two cars. Now, the other car was recently cannibalized to take parts off it to rebuild chassis number 7205, which is the first 200 mile per hour Indy car in the hands of Jerry Grant at Ontario Motor Speedway in 1972, and that's owned by the Gurney family. So, so now as it is now, I have the only 72 model Eagle that never ran a race, yet it's an authentic All-American Racers Eagle. Now, the engine in it, we know, is the California 500 winning engine that Bobby Unser used in 1974. So there's some race history in the engine that's pretty cool. But so anyway,
What?
there was, yeah, yeah.
That's
Oh yeah,
nuts.
I'm telling you, yeah, it's crazy. And so Philippe was, at age 80 years old, he had owned the car and driven it in vintage events for 10 years or so. And he's like, you know what, I've had my fun. It's time for somebody else to enjoy the car the way I have. And unfortunately, my in-laws had passed away within a couple years of each other, and we came into some family money. And this was at a time when I had just completed Savage Angel, our book, and had published it. And I thought, and this car came up for sale from Philippe, and Mike just kind of told me about it, just like, oh yeah, Philippe's putting the Eagle up for sale, and that's a car that was one of my favorite cars in the vintage Indy paddock. And I liked that car so much. I was so nervous. I wanted to ask Philippe at one of the events before I owned the car if he would even let me sit in it, but I was so nervous and so impressed by the car. I'm like, I just don't have the courage to ask Philippe to sit in the car. And now I own it and drive it. But anyway, so Philippe was selling the car, and I talked to my wife. By the way, my wife deserves a lot of credit for the success and the fascinating life that I've led. She's really let me pursue my dreams for sure. And anyway, we talked about it, buying the car with the possibility of converting it into Swede Savage's car, because the car didn't have a race history, and there was a lot of confusion in vintage racing circles about, well, why is that car in the Bobby Unser livery? Because we know that the pole winning car is in the hands of the Gurney family, and Scott Borchetta down in Nashville owns the short track car from that year, and there weren't three Olsenite Eagles. So it was kind of causing confusion in the world of vintage racing, and that's something that I wasn't really comfortable with, running a car that really. Now, that being said, the chassis that I now own was always intended to be Bobby Unser's reserve chassis for 1972, which he never needed. So in some respects, it was kind of authentic in that regard. But of course, Swede was my favorite driver as a kid, made a huge impression on me. And I just completed this book with his posthumous daughter, Angela. And I thought, man, could you imagine, if we had this car and changed it into Swede's car? There's Angela, beautiful, wonderful woman. Um, and but I couldn't really do that with a clear conscience without asking Angela first, out of respect to the family, because it's, some people look at it and go, oh gosh, why would you have a car like that? But Angela and I both see this as putting the pieces back together and celebrating his life instead of mourning his death. There were too many years of mourning his death and the tragedy that was his crash. And that car was so dynamic and so attractive, and Swede Savage and the STP Eagle, those two went hand in hand together. And it's just, both of those are iconic in Indy 500 history. So Angela said, Ted, I prayed and prayed and prayed on this. And she said, at the end of the day, it's not so much what you want to do or what I want to do. It's what my father would want. And she said, I came to the conclusion that he would love to have his STP car at the Vintage Indy racetrack, or Vintage Indy racing events in front of the public again 50 years after his death. And I think he would think that would be pretty cool. So with Angela's permission, we went forward and made the conversion. And wow, I mean, that color, it's like stepping back into a time machine. Never in my life, and I've had a lot of other people tell me the same thing. They never, ever dreamed they would ever see that car again. And I've had people in tears, and I've had people that have told me they've driven hundreds of miles to come see that car because of what it means to them. And it's very, very special. And, so the first time I drove it in Swede's colors was at St. Louis a couple years ago, and it happened to be on Swede's birthday, August 26th, which was totally by accident, wasn't planned, but it was, divinely ordained, if you want to choose to believe that. I certainly did. And then, as it turned out, the first day of practice for IndyCar got rained out, and all the broadcast teams were at the track Saturday morning looking for news stories, and the Vintage Indy paddock was set up, and so this reporter came by and started talking with me, and I told her the significance of the car, the fact that Swede was my favorite childhood driver, and this is the first time that we're going to run it today, and it's his 77th birthday. And I started getting choked up when I was talking to her on air, and my voice started cracking and stuff. But it's very, very special indeed.
Yeah, without a doubt. And and I know Rick and those guys over at Turn 4 Restorations had a big hand in that, but it's so
Yes.
meticulously converted down to the hand pinstriping, on some parts of that. But I can't not get hung up on the idea that that offie that's in the back of that thing was Bobby Unser's winning engine from the California 500. Did you say?
Yeah. 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 That's right. And
Was
so All
that or
American Racers, they're Mandrake the magician. John Miller was, I think, his name in the engine room. He had the magic touch, and even Bobby Unser would back this up. They designed a twin oil pump offie that only All American Racers ran. So this is one of those dual oil pump offies in my car, and so it's from that standpoint, it's quite unique too. It's very authentic to All American Racers. Now you don't know it until you open up the engine, but it's yeah, that's a special engine for sure. Man, does that thing make the power? Wow. Jeez. I mean, it has
holy
more power
crap,
than
Ted.
today's current Indy cars. It's
Man, you
yeah,
got more history in that car than you banked for, I think.
yeah, yeah. It's and to your point about all the details on it. Fortunately, there weren't many photos of the car. Well, the car changed appearance throughout the month of May, as it was very common back in those days, where the cars on race day morning would be covered with contingency stickers. Premier Fasteners would pay $500 to the winner if you had your sticker on their car. So on race day there were all these stickers all over the race cars, and so Swede's car on race day was no different than most. And had a lot of stickers on it, and we had photos. Um, Oddly enough, Kevin, you might find this kind of interesting, and I certainly did as we were trying to find photos. Trying to find a photo of the right side of any Indy car at the Speedway's photo archives is extremely difficult, because all the photographers are sitting inside the track,
That's
and
right.
you
I just
rarely
thought of
get
that as you were saying
any.
it.
Yeah, you rarely get. So there was only one in focus shot of Swede's car that we had that was clear enough that we could actually determine which stickers were on the right side of the car, what they were, and where they went. So, but fortunately, we had enough collection of photos so that car is exactly the way it looked on race day morning in '73 for Swede,
Wow.
right down to the black wings. So all three STP cars in the race that year were painted identically in that Dayglow red color. But prior to Carb Day, they had painted the front wings of Gordy Johncock's car white and the front wings of Swede's car black, so that the team could tell them apart as they were, coming down the main straightaway toward the signboard guy out at the pit wall, because otherwise, you couldn't tell them apart. So
Sure.
the front wings on my car are black because that's exactly the way Swede's car looked on race day.
Man, that is absolutely nuts. And we could go on a whole nother tangent about all that stuff. But seventh gear over at fans, I got a question for you. Now that we're talking about this great iconic livery of that Swede Savage 72 Eagle, and I know a lot of you are big Indy 500 fans and appreciate the heritage and the history and and revere it like Ted and I do. So my question for you, seventh gear over F fans, and I want you to comment below, is what was your all-time favorite Indy 500 livery? Think about that. It could go back, it could be recent, it could be a long time ago. Maybe it's Swede's car. Maybe it's the yellow Pennzoil colors that Johnny Rutherford and Rick Mears, made famous, or maybe it's Danny Sullivan's 1985 Miller High Life car. Whatever it is, comment below. Let's find out what you guys think. I'll be happy to reply to those. I pretty much hit those up all the time. But now there's another thing I want to ask you about, Ted. But before we get to that, I just want to take a second here to acknowledge our show partners here. First of which is krausemeats.com, because now that we're turning the corner from the summer into the fall and into the holidays, what better time to shop for the holiday gift giving season but right here, right now at krausemeats.com. They've always been top quality since 1923, and again, provide the finest in handcrafted small batch artisan sausages and meats. you can go to krausemeats.com. They'll have your gift boxes up there. Take advantage of the new lower pricing. Again, who doesn't like meat? And if you don't like meat, you're just wrong. But go to krausemeats.com and check out what they have to offer. Also, go visit our good friends and partners over at Dick Carriers and Respect Your Package, makers of those ultra high end men's breathable underwear with that ball bustier technology. Yes, I said it. But they're fantastic. I have them. You should have them too. Heck, you could pair those up with Kraus Meats and make a great gift package. But if you go to respectyourpackage.com and you enter in the promo code respect7, which is the number 7, just respect7, you'll get 20% off of your entire order. So go ahead and check those both of our show partners out. It helps us out, it helps them out, and we all appreciate that. So thank you very much for taking a moment out of the show here to listen to that. But at the same time, if you like what you're hearing us doing with great guests like Ted, and we've had so many others. In fact, so we just had that conversation about the Angela Savage stuff. We actually did a show at Ted's office in Carmel with the Miles Ahead stuff with both he and Angela that you can find on our archives there if you go back and look. And we actually had Ted on a long time ago when he was in a different office talking about how to raise money for sponsorship and things like that. So if you like what you're hearing us
Right.
do and you want to see more of it, go ahead and like what we're doing. Share us with your friends. Hit that subscribe button. We're trying to grow our viewership here on the YouTube channel. We want to get into the hundreds. We've actually already almost doubled our subscriber following list right now. So keep that going. So smash the subscribe button so that you can always be catching the latest in the greatest spectacle in podcasting. But now, Ted, I got to say, one of the things that I find the most thrilling, I shouldn't say the most thrilling, because there's a lot of things that you get to do that I find thrilling. But one of the events that you actually got to moderate up at the M1 just recently was the Turn 4 Kids. And I may not have that exactly correct, but it's pretty close. And you got to have effectively a panel discussion with living members of family members that have been killed as drivers in the Indy 500 in Turn 4. You had Angela Savage, as we know, daughter of Swede. You had Eddie Sachs Jr., whose dad, Eddie Sachs, the clown prince of racing. And then you had Rich McDonald's sister there as well. Talk us through, and I'm sure this was a Ted Woerner brainchild to pull this one together. But talk us
It was.
through how that, I'm sure it was that had Ted Woerner written all over it. But tell me a little bit about that, because I have no doubt that it was very emotional for all involved.
It was indeed, and I knew it would be, but I knew it was also necessary. Um, and first of all, I have to give credit to Angela Savage for coining the Turn 4 Kids. It is, it has kind of a happy-go-lucky sound to it, but in fact, we all know that, that's a club that nobody would choose to be a member of. So,
Right.
yeah, oddly enough, Swede Savage is the last driver to lose his life during the running of the Indianapolis 500 race in 1973. So that's 52 years ago. There has not been a driver fatally injured in the race since then. And then the last driver prior to that was two drivers, Dave McDonald and Eddie Sachs, who had a crash in Turn 4 in almost the identical location, or the crash originated in the identical location that Swede hit the wall. So Dave McDonald lost control of his car coming out of Turn 4 on the second lap of the race, with all kinds of traffic bearing down on him as his car caromed across the track after hitting the inside wall and got clobbered by Eddie Sachs's car, and Eddie died instantly, and then Dave McDonald died a couple hours later. But yeah, the origin of that was really kind of the genesis of Angela, referring to the Turn 4 Kids, and Angela's desire to all get together with them somehow to just to share that bond. And this was an occasion where I just needed to invite them, to enable them to come, and then just get out of the way and let them interact with each other. And this was kind of my birthday present to Angela, because the panel discussion was October 4th, and her birthday was the following day, October 5th. So I thought, well, how could you possibly, give someone that you care for that much something as meaningful as that? And now the interesting thing is that Vicki McDonald, now she's the only surviving immediate family member of Dave McDonald, because we lost Sherry McDonald, her mother, a few years ago, and then Rich McDonald, her brother, who was very active in evangelizing and promoting. That's probably the wrong word. Um, uh, Continuing the legacy and the understanding of the legacy of their great father, Dave McDonald, and his incredible career. Um, but so Vicky and Eddie had never met each other until the weekend at the American Speed Festival. So, their fates were intertwined by destiny, if you will, when their fathers died in the same crash at Turn 4 in 1964. And then, but then the three of them, they got together, the night before or at least Vicky and Angela did. They stayed at the same hotel. And then, the morning of the panel discussion was very emotional. I was up on stage with the three of them. We had four directors' chairs across the stage, and I was sitting on the far right side, and then the three of them were seated next to me. And every one of us at some point during that hour-long panel discussion had tears in our eyes, myself included. And I could see people in our audience wiping tears away too. It was, of course, it was sad, but it was also very triumphant, I guess might be the word that best describes it, because now we were all together. We were talking about it. We weren't hiding from the tragedy anymore. And each of the children of these famous drivers are so well loved and respected. And their personalities were on full display. Poor Vicky was so nervous because it was really her brother's task, if you will, that he chose to perpetuate his father's legacy. And with his recent death, and we all dearly miss Rich, Vicky was like, this. I feel like I'm doing something that Rich should be here doing. And we said, Vicky, we're so glad that you're here. And she's such a beautiful, wonderful soul, just like her mother and brother. I've never met a more beautiful, charming, gracious family. So, and it was just important to understand that these were all human beings that have lives. Yes, their fathers were heroic race car drivers, but to them, they were just dad. They would have loved their dad just as much if he'd been an insurance salesman. But they chose this high risk, high profile profession, and they all lost. And you look at the number of drivers who have competed at Indianapolis over the 100+ years, and very few of them met the fate that their fathers did. So they all understand that they're part of a very small, exclusive club that nobody wants to be a part of. But that being said, they're also equally, um, um, they share a deep bond and love of each other that only a family going through that similar tragedy could appreciate.
Sure, that makes sense. So, knowing you as sort of the history buff of the Indianapolis 500 and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway that I know you to be, and I know you know a lot about the backgrounds of each of those drivers. Was there anything that you learned in that moderating of that discussion that you didn't know?
Hmm, good question. Um, the discussion was more me trying to set up each of the three guests um, to express themselves the way that uh, dignity would demand, I guess you would say. Um, it wasn't so much, I know Vicky in the early stages, she brought a little cheat sheet with her with all her dad's accomplishments and race wins and so forth. And at one point she was reciting that kind of out of her, I think she felt an obligation to do that, maybe with Rich gone, which was really charming. But everyone was so beloved on the panel. Did I learn anything new? Nothing rings a bell. I'm sure there was probably something that came out. One of the interesting things was Team Penske had brought one of Al Unser Jr.'s winning Indy cars from the 1975 season, the Portland and Long Beach winner, for display. And Bernie King from Team Penske was sitting I was surprised to see him sitting in the audience. And afterwards, he came up to Vicky and said, Roger, meaning Roger Penske, frequently talks about Dave McDonald. And I wanted you to know that how much respect that Roger has for Dave as a driver, or had for Dave back in the days. And I thought that was very gracious of him to stay and approach her at the end of the panel and tell her that. That's very meaningful. So I guess that's something I didn't know that I learned. It was that the respect that Roger Penske had for Dave McDonald. He also had a lot of respect for Swede Savage because he tried to hire him on a couple of different occasions. And we know that from the research we did in the book. We've got a letter from a guy named Dick Rutherford who did PR for All American Racers, and through Swede's relationship with Dan Gurney, apparently Dick Rutherford was acting as Swede's agent between the years of 71 and 72. And he wrote a letter to Swede outlining the opportunities that he had identified for Swede for the 1972 season. And one of them was from Roger Penske, which is just blew me away. But here's the letter, and the timestamp or the from the post office was on the envelope, and I mean it was uh, absolutely fact. That Roger Penske had tried to hire Swede Savage, presumably for the ride that Gary Bettenhausen took, and so
Ah,
a lot of
that's
interesting
interesting.
history. Yeah.
So do you feel like, and I know Angela's been through this a couple times. I don't know about Eddie Jr., but do you feel like whether it was Eddie or Vicky that they, at the conclusion of that panel discussion, that there was a sense of relief and maybe a new sense of calm, that there was more of a community there than perhaps they had realized, and they were closer as a result of that conversation?
Yeah, I think Eddie probably had the most exposure to the racing industry because he um, has involvement in a midget or sprint car team. Don't know the
Right.
extent of that. He's been involved in racing, for several years, a number of years anyway. So he's probably the one that is, had the most involvement in the sport. Um, and that being said, he said his mother didn't want him to have anything to do with the sport for understandable reasons. And and Eddie was interesting. He has an interesting view on things. He said, Ted, I was only 2 years old at the time. I really don't have any memories of my father. Vicky clearly does because I think she was. Oh, this is it. Okay. So here's another thing I learned, and this is kind of relevant to what we're talking about. So Vicky said, and this put a tear in my eye right away. She said, so my father died on, oh, I can't, May 31st or 30th. I can't remember the date, but she said my 5-year-old birthday party had already been scheduled for the day that my dad's funeral was now scheduled. And my mom backed up the date of my dad's funeral so that I could still have my 5-year-old birthday party. And I'm like, wow. And she said she remembers, all this huge throng of people, showing up for her 5-year-old birthday party, and she thought, wow, this is amazing. And then her 6-year-old birthday comes along. She's like, where'd all the people go? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but that
I'm
was
sure.
a
Yeah.
very emotional, as you can imagine. And imagine, and Dave's widow Sherry deciding that, what, we have to hold Vicky's party the way it should go, and we'll pay our respects to Dave the day after. So imagine, having a 5-year birthday party for your 5-year-old daughter, and the very next day having going to the funeral for your husband. I mean, it's what these people went through. I mean, it's people don't realize, and this is why I became so intrigued with the Swede and Angela Savage story and the whole Savage stories, because the world goes on, but these families, the tragedy follows them sometimes for generations. And I think it's important that we all know and respect that, and you know, never forget these drivers. There's the anniversary of Greg Moore's death. Was very recent, and people remember that. And there's a race in memory of Brian Clausen every year at the Speedway. So thankfully, we're now paying the proper respect to those drivers who lost their lives, pursuing the sport that we all love.
Sure. And even recently, they were talking about the anniversary of Tony Renna's death as well. So there's
Right.
that also. Um,
Yep.
and I think, and what I loved I shouldn't say what I love. There's nothing to love about, losing a family member like that. But, the fact that, you've written the book, Savage Angel, and unfortunately, Seventh Year Overhead fans, if you want a copy of it, you're going to have to go like black market to try to find one because they are they are sold out. But um,
Hold out.
I know you mentioned you got ideas for a couple of other stories, and I want to kind of talk about that in a second. But I find it also very fascinating, and this is Seventh Year Overhead fans. You're gonna be as blown away as I was when I heard this story because I asked Ted off air. I said, so for those people that didn't get a chance to see that, to be there in person to attend that, and I don't know how many people there were. It sounds like there was a pretty good crowd. Is there any way to like, can you find it on YouTube? Can you stream it? Can you find it anywhere so you can see exactly the emotion and the conversations that were had? And to that, Ted, you said what happened?
There was a mix-up with the production company that was supposed to record it, and they didn't. So, what are you going to do? And their response to us was, we're so sorry, it'll never happen again. And my response to them was, yeah, and this panel discussion will never happen again either. So I guess in a
Yeah.
way, it kind of preserves the sanctity of the panel discussion, much like, when my wife and I got married, they asked us, do you want cameras in the church? And we're like, no, no, we don't. We don't want, a camera, obscuring anyone's view or, or impinging upon the sanctity of that ceremony. So I guess maybe in a strange way, you know, those that were gathered there were, it was for their eyes and ears only. And it was a once in a lifetime um, gathering. And we were all fortunate to be there and witness it. So in a strange way, maybe it was just meant to be. Who knows?
Maybe it was meant to be. That's true. Like a
Yeah,
lot of other things, like, just the story behind the car and how you and Angela
right.
met and, wound up collaborating on the book. Now, that said, you mentioned that you're thinking about possibly a couple of other books that you've got rolling around in your brain up there. What are you thinking once you get freed up from so you've got some actual spare time instead of working your off trying to get
Yeah,
all this other
yeah,
stuff done?
yeah. We're talking about years down the road. Well, actually, one of the primary book was, and I had kind of started working on it already prior to even learning about the opportunity at M1. And it's a fascinating story about a guy who's now my friend, Brian Smith, who's the 2016 American Flat Track Grand National Champion, and how he became champion running on a custom designed and built motorcycle by another friend of mine, Ricky Howerton, whose father, Jackie Howerton, was a crew member on Pat Patrick Racing the year that Swede raced for him. And if you want to go even further into the weeds on that one, Ricky ended up marrying Wally Dallenbach's daughter, Colleen, and Wally Dallenbach was the driver who took Swede Savage's place on the Patrick Racing team after Swede had his big crash at Indy. So anyway, but Ricky is a phenomenal, very bright engineer and fabricator, and he decided he was going to build himself a flat track motorcycle just for the hell of it. And this it was going to be every bit a flat track racing Mike, but he just wanted to build it just because it was something he wanted to do. He grew up around the Honda factory team, south of the Speedway when they were running Bubba Schobert and Gene Romero was the manager of that team. These are names that motorcycle race fans would know for sure. And so anyway, he started in on this flat track motorcycle project, and then through various twists of fate, Brian Smith, who was really at a career crossroads, a flat track motorcycle racer who was really known for his expertise on the mile flat tracks. He was called the Mile Master. And anyway, he had a chance meeting with Ricky at Ricky's shop on Gasoline Alley, where Ricky had his flat track. They call it a street tracker, a bike that is, resembles a flat track bike, but you can throw a license plate on it and a headlight and ride it on the street. So, Brian sees this motorcycle that's built by a guy who's used to building components for Indy cars and sports cars and exotic racing machines. And Ricky looks at this thing and thinks it's the most incredible piece of machinery he's ever seen built to take on flat track. And he asked Ricky, "What are you going to do with that? Are you going to race it?" He said, "No, I don't race." And he said, would you let me race it? And he said, well, I don't have a team or anything. So anyway, in a very short period of time, they get sponsorship from one of Ricky's friends, Bo Lamastis, who owns Crossley Nostalgic Radios and Electronics, I guess you would call his company. Very, very successful. And they go flat track racing. And so the first thing Ricky has to do is take the license plate and the lights off the bike that he built and put a number plate on it. And they go off to Springfield, which is the most revered circuit in flat track motorcycle racing, and they damn near win the first time out. And now Harley Davidson has not lost a championship in 21 consecutive seasons. And then I think the year or two after that, they put it all together. They ran all the races, and they end up winning the Grand National Championship. And Brian Smith's career was really at death's door prior to this chance meeting with Ricky, and the two of them hit it off. And then they subsequently got hired away by Harley Davidson, subsequently got hired away there by Indian, all the best, so it was Ricky the tuner. It's kind of like Will Powers had the same engineer in IndyCar for 20 years, almost, Dave Faustino. And so it's kind of the same thing, when you've got a chemistry between an engineer and a rider like that, that's clearing, paying dividends. These factory teams are like, well, it doesn't make sense for us to hire the rider if the engineer doesn't come with them. So they hired them both in two different instances. Harley Davidson and Indian, but the real story is how they came together. It was really like out of a movie. It never should have happened. It was completely improbable, and yet it did happen. And this team knocks off the big factories for the first time in 21 years. It's really so. Anyway, and then now Brian lives up here in Fenton, Michigan, half an hour away from M1 Concourse. So now he and I.
Wow.
And there's this, yeah. So then there's Flint, Michigan, which is where Brian grew up, is considered the epicenter for flat track motorcycle racing. There have been so many successful flat track motorcycle racers. Collectively, they're called the Michigan Mafia. And I mean, there's Jay Springsteen, who won 3 flat track championships, Scott Parker, who won 9, Brian Smith won 1, and I know there's several others going back into some of the earlier years. But anyway, we got Brian involved. We're building an off-road course as well at M1 Concourse on some property we own across the street. And so we're going to get Brian involved in that project. And they did Brian and some of his motorcycle racing buddies from up north did a flat track demo during our Woodward Dream Festival that was really well received. So we're going to be doing a lot more two-wheel activities out there. And, the opportunities are just wide open for Brian and us to collaborate, because our owner, Paul, is a two-wheel enthusiast himself. And with such a huge following, particularly among flat track racers here in Michigan, it just makes sense.
Dude, only you find these stories and have these connections that are like, people talk about 6 degrees of separation. You're like half of a degree of separation from like multiple layers of decades worth of like stuff that gets tied together. It's only you're the only guy I know that does this. That's awesome.
Well, and I think
Ted.
that's kind of my secret sauce for success is I've always felt like I can connect dots in the ways that other people just can't even see the dots. I can piece together things that I'm very good at, and I've always kind of thought, it'd be funny to, like go on like a lecture circuit with racers, and come to me with your sponsorship ideas, and in 15 minutes I can tell you how you should approach these sponsors, because I for whatever reason, I just have a knack for putting things together that other people just can't see. I don't know why, but I'll take it.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, Seventh Gear Overhead fans, you got to understand, this dude's a racer through and through. I mean, he was racing Barber Saab back in the day. And to his point just now about looking at sponsorship stuff, for those of you that don't know, he and former Indy 500 entrant Stefan Gregoire were partners at the Miles Ahead for a little bit, and Ted actually helped Stefan land sponsorship for his Indy 500 program, which was, if I remember correctly, Ted, it was the effing vodka program. I was actually having this conversation with my cousin earlier today, and then for some reason, I never like fully engaged both sides of my brain on the name of that vodka. And I'm like, at some point somebody was probably like effing vodka. It's like, how did this deal come
Yeah,
together? It was probably 2 o'clock in the morning, but what a great name! But that actually was legitimately the name of the vodka. But at any rate, seventh year over at fans, Ted,
yeah.
there's not much that Ted does not know about or can get to the bottom of. And I tell you
And I'm
what,
I'm finally
for you,
working at a place now that actually appreciates all that inane knowledge and an arcane history that I've got tucked away in my brain. What are the chances that I could end up at a place that actually pays you for the knowledge that you have like that?
well, it's like, when I pull some of that stuff out of my head to like the conversation I was having with my cousin today or my wife, she's like, "Who are you? Like Cliff Clavin?" I'm like, "Yeah, maybe in some respects, but
Yeah, right.
that's sort of like our both our blessing and our curse at the same time. It's like, maybe we
Yeah,
get
exactly.
appreciated and make some money from these things that we know."
Yeah.
And also, seventh gear over fans, if you don't know about flat track motorcycle racing, especially on a mile, you got to have balls of steel to do well there because that is some
Yeah.
serious ish right there.
Well, and
But Ted, yeah,
yeah,
go ahead.
go ahead. I was just going to
No,
say,
you're just
to that point, the year that Brian won his championship, he had to finish ahead of his arch nemesis Jared Meese, which he did on the last turn of the last lap of the last race of the season. And it, as dramatic as it gets, but two riders were killed that weekend. This is what flat track racing is. I mean,
yeah.
can you imagine?
That's some serious stuff, man. That's some
Yeah,
serious stuff.
yeah,
Okay. So as man, we could talk for hours and hours on end here, Ted. We should probably just go live at some point and let people call in and ask us questions. You'll be like the next second, get you and like Steve Zoutke on, and we'll have the second coming of like
yeah, right.
talk of Gasoline Alley or something here.
Steve's
But
great.
I want to kind of I kind of want to fast forward here a little bit, knowing that you run that Eagle at the Vintage Indy events, most of them. And obviously they are by and large accompanying the IndyCar series, like at St. Louis and Long Beach and
Yeah.
places like that. I want to get your take on a couple things here. I want to know what your theory is on why Michael Andretti is selling his $12 million mansion about 10 minutes from my house, and Marco Andretti has recently retired, and the rumors therein tying the two even closer together. And go.
Wow, that's something I didn't expect. I can't profess to being very close to that situation. Um, the way that Michael disappeared and the speed with which he disappeared from the Cadillac Formula One program surprised me quite a bit. Another thing that surprised me about Michael Andretti is that I never, and I think many people probably never guessed that he would have had the success that he had as a team owner. I never saw that in him when he was a driver. I just didn't see it in his personality. So kudos to Michael for being an incredibly successful team owner, regardless of if it's somebody else's money or Honda or whatever. He put the pieces together and he, really applied himself. And so I really have a much higher degree of respect for him uh, because of what he's been able to do in his post racing career. Yeah, it's hard to know what to make of that. Um, the one thing that kind of surprises me is that a guy like that could have a $12 million house to sell in the first place. I mean, I know he did well racing, but a lot of people have done well racing, and I don't know of many IndyCar drivers anyway that have a $12 million home to sell. But yeah, I really don't know what to make of it, Kevin. I'm kind of perplexed by not so much the Marco announcement, the retirement. That didn't really surprise me at all. But Michael's recent, I'll call it disappearance. That's maybe too harsh of a word, but from the racing scene is quite a surprise to me. And it's hard for me to think that he just walked away and never to be seen again around the racetrack. So I really don't know what to make of that.
Yeah, I really struggled with that too, Ted, when it everything sort of played out the way it did, where he was sort of forced out of that whole Andretti Cadillac F1 deal.
Right,
Um,
right.
and I was just like, this dude grew up in a racing family. His life has been racing. For him to just quit cold turkey, I'm just like, something something just
Yeah.
ain't right here, right? It doesn't pass the smell test. And I know I was talking with Marshall
Yeah.
Pruitt about it, and he was kind of saying the same thing, but didn't have anything concrete about it. And then I'm like, then of course the rumors were out. Oh, is Michael going to buy another team now that he's out of the team that he built from basically from nothing? And then he came out and said, no, I have no interest. And at the time, the rumors swirled around Prema, was because Prema was in difficult straits financially. But if Michael bought Prema, there was no charter involved with that, so that didn't make sense. And then Michael came out and said, no, I'm not buying an IndyCar team. And then
Yeah.
within a couple of days, Marco retires. And it's like, oh, is Marco retiring because Marco is going to be the one to start the team? And is that where some of that $12 million from Michael's home is going to go?
Well, so
So
here's one thing that I will say about this situation that maybe isn't widely known, or maybe should be more widely known, is that a few years ago, and I suppose this is still a thing on Wall Street, it was fashionable for some time, and certainly at the time that the Andretti family participated in this. There's a financial uh, vehicle called SPACs. I think it's an acronym for Special Purpose Acquisition Corporation. I think that's what it is.
I do
Now,
remember that.
essentially what you do is, you go out and raise capital as much as you can, I guess. Um, and it's surprising to me that you can do this legally, but you acquire capital for future acquisitions. And apparently, the people investing in this have to have a pretty darn good feeling of confidence in who the principals are in this SPAC um, stock offering. Otherwise, why would you invest in it? And the
Right.
Andretti's raised like $200 million, like a huge amount of money in this, special purpose acquisition corporation in which they sold shares. So, what little I've been able to see and discern, they bought like a software company or something that really
Yeah, I
don't
think
know
that's right.
what
I
the
seem, I seem to
significance.
recall that.
And
Yeah, I think you're right.
and one of the gentlemen on their board of directors is the former CEO of U.S. Concrete, which was one of Marco's sponsors at Indy.
Yep.
So anyway, I feel that those funds are going to factor into this somehow too. I'm also a little concerned about Dan Taurus and his involvement, and I should be careful what I say because I don't know the gentleman, but it's something about this kind of smacks of Stephen Hilbert, high
Yeah.
flyer, CEO of Conseco, spent tons of money in racing, and he was in the financial services business, and then that whole thing deflated and went bust, quickly. Um, I'm not insinuating that the same thing's going to happen with Group 1001, but when you're selling financial instruments to clients and you're spending millions and millions of dollars on sports marketing, racing, Formula One, I don't know.
No, I hear
And
you.
that's
I hear
about
you.
all I'll
I mean,
say
it
on that one.
does. Well, you're right. I mean, it does smack of a bit of impropriety, especially with the group that he's keeping, right? I mean, his investment partners are, part owners of the LA Dodgers and, other sports franchises, so, and hedge funds, and so I mean, and poor unfortunately with that Group 1001, poor Zach Veach was the one who got run over by the paving
Right.
machine
Yeah.
on that
Yeah,
whole
exactly.
deal. So yeah, so it's
Cruel
and I
sport.
just it is a cruel sport, and I'm not sure what to make of it. I guess the next season or two, under full Towers control, will sort of tell the tale. I mean, I know they just extended Kyle Kirkwood. Um,
Right.
obviously Colton's moved on to F2. Hopefully that goes well for him. So and we'll see what happens. So
Yeah.
also, latest rumor I just read this afternoon. Get your take on. Speaking of Roger Penske, do you anticipate Roger Penske retiring anytime soon and turning over the running of anything to his kids?
No, I don't think he'll ever retire.
I
He'll
don't think
retire
so
on his
either. I think
deathbed.
he'll.
He's just not
I was gonna
wired
say. I
that
think
way.
he'll. Yeah, he'll
I,
retire when he
I've,
dies.
I've met him on a couple of occasions. I actually wrote an article on him for my college fraternity magazine back in the 80s because he's a member of the same college fraternity I am. Spent some time with him, and I was impressed by him. I still am. But there are people like him and like the gentleman that owns our business. uh, they are just wired differently. You think with those kinds of funds and resources that they would be on a beach somewhere sipping mai tais and celebrating their success and a life well lived. They're just not wired that way. These people aren't wired that way. Roger Penske, my take on that is that his enjoyment is business, always has been, always will be, and he's always told people that ask, racing is my golf game. you know I come to the races because
Sure.
that's my way to relax. And I don't think we'll ever know how much money that he's personally put into supporting his teams. We'll probably never know that. His teams and cars have always appeared to be well sponsored. People, I think, just assume that the sponsors are picking up the whole tab. I don't think we'll ever know. But the interesting thing too, Kevin, you think about all the years that he's competed in IndyCar racing and sports car racing. Imagine the total amount of money that has been spent by Roger Penske and his organization,
Oh,
whether it's his money or somebody else's, over 50 plus years. Must be a staggering sum. you know.
well,
Uh,
right. Even beyond just the IndyCar stuff. Think about, in the early days when
yeah,
he had his Trans Am stuff with Donahue, or he was trying to run his Formula One program for a little bit, or the tracks that he's owned, or the tracks that
right.
the tracks that he's sponsored, or the ones that he tried to promote, all that kind of stuff. Um,
Yeah.
wow, there's a whole lot there. So I'm gonna throw my producer JD a curveball right here, but in light of these last couple questions, seventh gear over at fans, I'm really curious to get your take on what you think is going on in this whole Andretti saga here. Is Michael going to get back into the auto racing game, whether it's Indy cars or somewhere else? Is it going to be Marco that leads the charge here for this next yet another generation of Andrettis? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Go ahead and comment below. I'll be sure to check them out and respond. Um, all right. So Ted, is we're closing in on the checkered flag of this week's show. We've covered a lot of ground, but I feel like we could be talking for hours here. Is there anything that we didn't get to tonight that you wanted to talk about that has slipped my mind?
Not really. It was funny because when I was thinking about, we talked a little bit a day or two before this, and what are the things that we could talk about that were interesting? And one thought did pop into my mind. I once interviewed with Zach Brown's company, and probably could have had a job there, but it turned out that I was the first person to interview for this position, and I just couldn't afford to wait several weeks while they exhausted the rest of the interviewing process. I was told in that
At
first
Just
interview that I
Marketing?
would be, yeah, and it was a great position, and I was really excited about it. But I was told that I was the first person that interviewed for the position. You will definitely be a finalist. I can tell you that right now, is what the gentleman said. And but I had another offer in the meantime. It was kind of like a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush kind of thing. But I guess if I ever have one regret, it's that I didn't stick it out for a few weeks and try and get that last position. But on the other hand, a year or two later, Zach sold the company, and the whole thing kind of dissolved anyway. Once it got, I think it was CSS Stellar that bought his agency, and to my knowledge, or
Right.
from what I observed anyway, it just kind of fizzled out like most of those acquisitions do. I think Zach had a employment contract that he was bound by, but like most business owners, to help in the transition. But CSS Stellar bought his agency, I believe it was them, and then it just kind of scattered to the four winds. So maybe it was a good thing after all that I didn't go to work there.
Well, irony of all ironies. So yes, seventh year over at fans. In case you didn't know, the the head honcho of the McLaren racing juggernaut, especially on the F1 side, but also the IndyCar side, Zach Brown, used to be a local boy. Actually, came from California, but he had his own marketing company here in Zionsville, Indiana.
That's
Just
right.
Marketing
Yeah.
International, JMI. That Ted just told you that he was the first interviewee and guaranteed a spot. I also had submitted my resume and I was scheduled for an interview for Zach Brown's company as well. So we have that in common also.
Yeah, that's fun.
But yeah, like you, I had another offer on the table at the time as well. So that didn't happen. But
Right. Yeah.
all right, my friend. I seriously think we need to consider maybe getting a roundtable somewhere around the indie time here in May. Maybe we get you and Zoutke and Mike and maybe a couple other folks, and we maybe
Yeah, that'd be great.
revive the old talk of gasoline alley that Donald Davidson used to do.
Yeah,
Bring some of those
absolutely.
tasty Kraus meats, and I'll make sure we feed you guys.
Yeah. Oh, that'd be great.
All
Yeah, I'd
right.
love to do
So,
that.
Ted, I know you got a lot going on at M1. Where can people go to see exactly what's happening with M1 in any way, shape, or form, aside from
Yeah,
your AV
best
company?
place is our website, m1concourse.com. And we've got several menus there for our festivals and events where you can learn, how you can attend. And, we're just getting ready to nail down our 2026 schedule, but, it should be an exciting year. And I'll be, knee deep in the X Center development as we, continue to ramp that up and get ready for our opening day. And again, that'll be probably midsummer. I'm guessing mid to late summer for the X Center. But it'll be a spectacular facility. Nothing like it anywhere in the country. Maybe even the world.
Well, yeah, everything that I've already seen, and I haven't even been able to attend in person yet, but I intend to in this coming season. If you go to their website, and I've been there, I mean, you see some of the great event photos. There's been videos out there. I mean, and to your point about where the X Center is, right on like Woodward and that southeast corner. For those of
Yep.
you just car nuts, not even racing nuts. I mean, you all know about the infamous Woodward Drive, right? The Dream Drive on Woodward, and it's right there, so you can't miss it. So wow. Ted, I'm so appreciative that you carved out a little bit of time. I know it's kind of late there, and you're working and you kind of your bachelor pad there, but I couldn't thank you more for coming back on. It's been too long, man. We gotta make sure that we stay in touch more often than that. But it's always a great time talking to you. I love hearing everything that you've got going on and just everything that you've been through and seen and can share with us. So thank you very much, man. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Kevin. I'm very blessed, and I listen to your show all the time. And on my long drives, between Indianapolis and Michigan, it's one of my favorite things to do. So thanks for the great job that you do and the value that you provide the racing community. It's you do a great job.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, Ted, and we're working on it. We got some things in the hopper, and thanks in part to you. I don't even think I've told you this yet. We are on the audio side of things. We are about 140 downloads shy of 10,000 all time, and we are now
Wow,
heard in 114 countries worldwide. We're
fantastic.
about 3 episodes shy on the audio side of 100 all time, and if you add in all of our YouTube videos now, that we're still growing. So again, everybody share, like it, subscribe, right? So we can drive those numbers up. We are well over 10,000, but it's been
Fantastic.
shows like the ones I've done with you and with Angela and like Derek Daly and all
Mm,
the other great
yeah,
people that we've got on, and been able to meet through folks like you and have these other conversations and kind of be able to tell those stories that you can typically only write about. And that's
right.
that's exactly where we're at is, no, nothing softball here. I mean, I get sometimes that we got to be a little bit sensitive to people's obligations, but otherwise it's full send, baby.
Yeah, it's great, Kevin. Really appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
Can't thank you enough, my friend. Look forward to doing it again sometime soon. If I don't get a chance to talk with you beforehand, I hope you and the family have a great Thanksgiving. But maybe I'll catch up with you here at Chris Kindle Fest here coming up in the next
Yeah,
week or so, and we can get a couple of brats together.
sounds good, Kevin. Thank you.
You got it, Ted. Thank you. All right, Seventh Gear Overhead fans, that's going to wrap it up for this week's show. What a fantastic episode with our great friend Ted Woerner and all the things he's got going on at M1 and his that beautiful Swede Savage Eagle and all the stuff that he's doing with the vintage indie stuff and his moderations. And this is just the tip of it. We're going to try to keep our slate full here moving into the off season. We did a great show just the other day with Lonnie Unser and Ashley Freiberg. We've got our good friend Ralph Howard Hansen coming up next week. We've got some drivers on tap here. We're going to try to keep you busy in the off season here, just so that you can be sure, if you've subscribed, that you're up to date with the latest in the greatest spectacle in podcasting. See you next week.